Hey, gang, it is Monday evening around a little before 8 p.m. And I actually haven't thought at all about what I'm going to say right now. So I'm just going to wing it for a minute. I'm standing, I'm a little bit uncomfortable. On Friday, I had pretty major surgery to repair my left hamstring. That, if you've been listening to my radio show, you know I blew up the first time I ever played pickleball. So, anyway, pretty big surgery on Friday. The surgery went really well. I had a fantastic surgeon. Here are my crutches, and I'm sort of working my way around things here. I do expect to be back at work, hopefully in studio on Wednesday to cover the primary elections here in Colorado. Let me talk about those for a minute. Obviously, the governor's race is very interesting. On the Republican side, you have one credible candidate in Barb Kirkmeyer. You have one grifter who I have no idea why he's running for office in Victor Marx, and you have a lunatic named Scott Bottoms. Polling is hard to really put any credence in because I don't know of any independent polling. The polling that has been done seems to have been funded by Victor Marx and shows him in the lead. It wouldn't shock me if he wins. There is very much of an anti-incumbent mood everywhere in American politics right now, including here. And Barb Kirkmeyer has served in political office for a long time. And the fact that she is sane and experienced is kind of the opposite of what Colorado Republicans, at least the base of the party, seem to want right now. So I have no idea. Will independent voters, unaffiliated voters, come and push Barb Kirkmeyer over the finish line? Will Victor get the nomination? Either way, whichever one of them is the nominee is going to lose to the Democrat. The question is, if it's Victor Marx at the top of the ticket, how much damage will he do to Republicans that might be in swing seats and potentially winnable down ballot races? I think if there are a few races like that, if Barb Kirkmeyer is the nominee, Republicans might win some of them. And if Victor is the nominee, Republicans will lose probably about all of them. I don't think there's any chance of Scott Bottoms being the nominee, and thank goodness for that. On the Democratic side, you have two credible candidates. And by credible, it doesn't mean candidates that I would prefer to be governor. If Barb Kirkmeyer is the Republican nominee, I am absolutely positively voting for her. If Victor Marx is the Republican nominee, I will likely either vote Libertarian or simply not vote in the governor's race. Both of the Democrats are too far to my left to even consider voting for, no matter how bad I think Victor Marx is. Now, between Michael Bennet and Phil Weiser, it's difficult to tell these guys apart on a policy basis. I was a little bit frustrated in my interview with Michael Bennet the other day because I went into it and I went into this race thinking that Michael Bennet would likely be a little bit more centrist than Phil Weiser because Bennet has some private sector experience, some managerial experience. Weiser is essentially an academic whose only managerial experience has been running the Attorney General's office, which is not nothing, but still. And, to me, and I should also note, I really don't know Michael Bennet very well at all. I've only spoke to him a few times and only once off the radio, and that was only for a few minutes. I know Phil Weiser a lot better. I do consider us friends. But going into this, I was thinking, all right, I'm probably going to participate in the Democratic primary because whoever is the Democratic nominee is going to win. And I was leaning toward Michael Bennet. Now I just don't know, because after my conversation with Michael Bennet, I'm a little frustrated. His television ads are very left-leaning on a policy basis, talking about a public option for healthcare, which is the first step that the left always takes to try to end private healthcare. And then he talks about a cap and trade program, which is such a silly idea that nobody outside of Europe or California even talks about it anymore. It's just a bad idea. And then when I asked Michael Bennet for specifics about how are you going to help people overcome cost of living challenges, he gave generalities and he gave a throwaway line about cutting red tape and making it easier to start businesses. But even most Democrats would go along with that. So I'm far less certain than I used to be. And I was never very certain. but I'm far less comfortable than I used to be that Michael Bennet would be more moderate than Phil Weiser. At this point, I think it's coin flip. And that's where my brain is too when it comes to how I may vote in the Democratic primary. I also said on the radio show, and I'm going to say it again here, however I vote in the Democratic primary, I'm not going to tell you. And there's a reason for that. It's not because I'm afraid of anything. It's because whichever one of them wins, whichever one of them becomes governor, at some point, I will be interviewing that person on KOA. And I don't want anybody saying that I either went particularly easy or particularly tough on that next governor because I happen to vote either for him or against him. So I'm going to keep that vote to myself. The one thing I will tell you for sure that I am doing in the Democratic primary is voting for Michael Dougherty for district attorney. Jenna Griswold, who I do think is the favorite, and I do think is fairly likely to win, is an untalented, hyper-partisan hack who has never been in a courtroom as far as I know and should not be Attorney General of the state of Colorado. She wants that as a stepping stool to run for governor, much like Phil Weiser is running for governor, because, as I often say, don't think about the letters AG as standing for Attorney General as much as standing for aspiring governor. So there's that. Also, the first congressional district, we will see whether the socialist Milot Quiros beats Diana DeGette. Again, I have no idea. Maybe unaffiliated voters will come out against this raging anti-Semitic socialist and push Diana DeGette over the line. But again, the anti-incumbent mood on both sides is very strong. The other thing I will say, very interesting Supreme Court cases. I basically guessed them right, except for the Mississippi case. And that was, I knew that was going to be close. I thought it might be 5-4 the other way. It came out 5-4 with the Supreme Court ruling that Mississippi and other states, of course, can count ballots that are received after Election Day as long as they are postmarked by Election Day. It was a 5-4 case. Now, I realize that a lot of people don't like that, and I will say that Congress can change that if they want. The reason that I don't like it very much, now I'm not talking about the court in particular, but talking about the policy, is that it gives a feeling that somebody might be trying to find a way to sneak votes in, kind of like I'm going to keep counting until I get the outcome I want. And so I think that receiving votes after Election Day just gives a bad flavor to elections, and I think we shouldn't have that. And here in Colorado, we don't. Now, Congress could change it. There is upside, there is upside in what the court did. What the court said was that states run these elections, even the federal elections. States run the elections. There are some basic ground rules that will be set by Congress, but other than that, states are in charge. And that means that a lot of this stuff that President Trump is looking to do in the SAVE Act is probably illegal. Now, again, this is something that would be passed by Congress, so it's not the same thing as just what a state is doing when you're talking about federal elections. Nevertheless, this 5-4, very narrow majority is laying down a small marker that, hey, you better be really careful if you think you're going to interfere in the state's ability to conduct elections. As I expected, the Supreme Court ruled that Donald Trump could not fire a Federal Reserve governor and that he could fire a Federal Trade Commission commissioner. There are going to be more cases tomorrow morning, including the birthright citizenship case. And the question there is not whether Trump will lose, it's just whether he will lose unanimously. I don't know. I could see Alito or Thomas perhaps going on with the Trump position. I think most likely is either 9-0 against Trump or 8-1 against Trump. But in any case, so that's going on there. Last thing I'll mention is that the so-called ceasefire with Iran seems to be very, very shaky. We always knew it would be. I kind of hope it breaks down and that we finally do what needs to be done. I mean, when I see that Iran attacks a ship in the Strait of Hormuz, and then the U.S. reacts by taking out certain missile sites along the coast of the Strait of Hormuz, my reaction is, why do they have any of those missile sites left anyway? That's ridiculous, right? So we need to do what needs to be done. President Trump seems afraid to do it, which is a little bit odd for a guy who always wants to project strength, but I think he may be forced to. We will see how it all plays out. I do note, though, that so far markets are reacting positively, even with this extra turmoil, even with what appears to be a little bit of additional risk to the flow of commodities and oils through the Strait of Hormuz. The market was up on Monday. Oil has been very, very steady. So that will be interesting. Anyway, as I said, right now it's Monday evening. I may release this Tuesday morning, but I should be back at work Wednesday morning to talk about whatever happened in Colorado's primary elections on Tuesday. I hope you have a wonderful day until then. And join me and Gina, 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. on KOA.